Hi everyone, Carter Krishna here for Beyond the 90 at beyondthe90.net. If you're here in the United States, I hope you're having a great and safe Thanksgiving week. Now, I wanted to address as succinctly as I can some of the private critiques, private pushback I'm getting for an article I penned on Monday, November 24th would have been the date, about USL and USL's fluffy rhetoric about promotion and relegation. It's fluffy rhetoric about Division One. It's fluffy rhetoric about being one of the best, biggest, and most prominent leagues in the world. And yet the fact that they cannot pay many of their players a living wage or give them health care or do the sorts of things that grown-up institutions do, that grown-up businesses do. And the pushback I've gotten has been not from fans, although it's been from a few fans, but I think they're just really kind of, this is a thing I've noticed in the United States that, let me backtrack here. The background on this is, of course, the current CBA negotiations, which are at an impasse with the USL Players Union, USL Players Association, the USLPA. And let's understand something very, very basic here. Football does not exist as a sport without solidarity. Solidarity is the number one organizing principle of this sport. It may not be the number one organizing principle of the traditional American sports. I can't speak to that, but it is in football. And what we've seen previously in this country specifically is that we have lots of fans who tend to take the side of billionaire owners or millionaire in USL or multi-millionaires. But I don't think the owners are the problem here. And this is what I'm going to get into in this video. I think this is a league HQ, league ownership problem, not a club ownership problem. In fact, I think the club owners have a lot in common with the players. And the club owners themselves are not able to maximize their business potential because of the structure of USL. So we have a labor dispute. We have a labor dispute active. The CBA, from all indications that I hear from both sides, there is not going to be an agreement before December 31st when the current CBA expires. Now, the Players Association has the option of not showing up to work when training camp opens next season. I don't think they'll do that, but they have that option. And they certainly are entitled to, in my opinion, to look at all of their options and assess them and weigh them. So what the pushback I have gotten in the last 36 hours has been effectively that USL teams don't make much money. They can't afford to do anything more for the players. They can't afford to give them health care in a lot of cases. They can't afford to increase their minimum salaries. They can't afford to give them, when I've mentioned to people about licensing, and they've said, well, these players, no one knows who these players are, so who cares? So that means then if a club or the league markets, maybe they should just take like generic player images off of Canva or Photoshop, right? In the opinion of those people. I'm being serious here because, there is a value attached to, if you are, let's just name a team, name a random player. If you are the Charleston Battery marketing around Aaron Malloy, I think there's a certain value to that. If you are Rhode Island marketing around Adekwa or Williams or Holstead, right? You don't want generic player images, so there is a value attached to that. Maybe it's not the value you think the players think it is, but there's certainly a value attached to that. I will tell you, when I'm hearing USL HQ thinks there's no value attached to that. Like basically $0, like the equivalent of, maybe the equivalent of like $10, nickel and dime stuff. And they do not want to move on this because the margins are tight. Now, this is coming at a time when we're hearing all kinds of big talk from USL about how they're going to create this new ecosystem, promotion and relegation. They're going to compete with MLS. They're going to revolutionize the game in this country. Now, I've already made my critiques about them sitting on the current calendar while MLS shifts their calendar. I think that puts USL in an awful bind if USL is representing what they claim they are. Then perhaps USL is just local, family-friendly, minor league entertainment, semi-professional entertainment. If it is, then maybe they should just fess up and admit that. But they're not. They're saying we're one of the big leagues in the world. We're aligning with we're developing guys and selling them. We want all our clubs to have academies. We're going to have promotion and relegation. We're going to have a Division I league in all these big markets. We're going to put teams in all these big markets. Okay, so then you have to grow up. You have to act like a grown-up business. You have to act. You have to pay labor. Compensate labor. It's not just pay. It's not just direct pay. You have to compensate labor based on their value to your business, which is, quite frankly, in my opinion, less than what the Players Union, the Players Association is demanding. So the critiques I've gotten from people privately is, well, Kartik, the clubs can't afford that. The clubs are barely keeping the lights on. The clubs are barely keeping the doors open. The clubs are barely surviving. I concede that in most cases, in many cases, not in most cases, in many cases. So why is that? Is it because the players are sucking them dry? Is it because the players are getting paid too much? Is it that healthcare is too expensive in this country? Well, actually, healthcare is too expensive in this country. And if we had, we can have the political debate, and I've written about this before. We can have the political debate about universal healthcare. I know a lot of people, conservatives, I know some liberal people who are against it, who say it disincentivizes work and all of that stuff. They have their reasons for opposing it. They say Europe and Canada, the places that they have universal health care, have become lazier, less productive than the United States. That's fine. We can have that discussion. But you cannot debate from a club owner standpoint in this sport. It would save club owners a lot of money if we had some sort of national health care plan. That is beyond, it's just, is soccer, football more important than other aspects of society? That's something, I don't want to have that debate. But healthcare costs, salaries, housing. These are not the things that are necessarily putting USL owners on the margin. I'll tell you what it is. It's as the league ramps up its rhetoric and says, we want this, we want that, there are not the kind of revenue streams for club owners that there need to be. There are not the kind of revenue streams under the USL structure that, heaven forbid, the MLS structure has. As much as some of us complain about the MLS structure and complain about single entity and complain about the closed league and complain about the billionaires club, there are built-in ways for clubs to make revenue and keep revenue, even in that single entity structure that you don't have in USL. So I've talked about the USL structure before. I'm going to just briefly say it again. Okay? League sponsorships stay with the league. League sponsorships in MLS are distributed. Some of it stays with the league, the rest of it's distributed among the 30 teams. TV deals in USL, very little comes back to the teams. Most of it stays in the league HQ. In MLS, it's distributed evenly throughout the league. Soccer United marketing, for all I have attacked them for or criticized them for through the years, they generate revenue for MLS owners. USL has no comparable revenue mechanism. Let's talk a little bit about merchandise sales, okay? That's another thing that clubs haven't been able to fully monetize. And so there is also limited, in some cases, limited sponsorship potential for USL clubs. Many USL clubs are still playing in rented facilities. Sure, the league has tried to expedite that, and the league is becoming more and more of a real estate business, but that's another thing that is hurt by the structure. So, those of you who have come to me and said, and it's because you're concerned about your specific club, and I get that, and you're saying, my club can't afford to meet the demands of the USL Players Association. My club might go out of business. Well, whose fault is that? It's not the players' fault. It's the fault of the structure of USL. And while we still hear about all this structure and pro-rel, the financial mechanisms have not been worked out. And I will tell you, if you are Running a club in USL, it's money out the door to USL HQ. You're paying for this. You're paying for that. You're paying, you're paying to be part of USL Productions. You're paying to be part. You are told you have to use certain vendors, and if you don't use those vendors, you get fined, and you get a concessional rate from those vendors, but it's still money out. There's other money out to the USL HQ. And USL itself, the league, is doing great. USL HQ is making lots of money. Now, there isn't the sort of revenue sharing. There are no revenue sharing mechanisms in USL. It is a very odd structure. It is very different than what you might think it is out there as a fan. And a lot of people come to this discussion of USL with a bias, a premise in the background that they don't like MLS. And because they don't like MLS, USL has got this clean slate. It's this blank canvas, and they can project on it anything they want, which is not MLS, which is the opposite of MLS. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not that way. And that's why we are where we are in this labor dispute. And it is a labor dispute at this point. Maybe I should have addressed this earlier in this conversation. But on Saturday, at the USL Championship title game, at the USL Championship final, we had all sorts of images. If you follow me on Facebook or Blue Sky, you can see those images. USL Players Union, Players Association has posted them all on Twitter as well. So go ahead and I'm not doing Twitter anymore, but you can find it on their Twitter page. So we had players walking out with a very clear message on their warm-up kits. You had fans in the stands in Tulsa with signs, very clear messaging. You had players after the match in a trophy ceremony no one saw, probably for this reason, very clear messaging. Yet during the broadcast, and I don't blame Mike Watts and Devin Kerr for this, I think they're both very, very competent professionals, but there's someone who signs their paychecks. By the way, it's not CBS, it's USL Productions. No mention of this, no acknowledgement of this, no discussion of this. Is USL going to be a grown-up league or not? I don't know how the NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB operate. I don't watch those sports. I do know in college sports when there's controversy, they talk about it on the broadcast. I do know in Europe when there's controversy, they talk about it on the broadcast. Although I have to tell you, I was really kind of disgusted with the way NBC handled the Manchester United fan protests a couple of years ago. And I was relieved when they had Danny Higginbottom, who now primarily does MLS games, but when he came into the studio that Monday and really pushed back on their narrative, which was that these fans were being hooligans and, the Glazers have done such a great job with the club, okay? But that's sometimes the mentality in the American media, which is another problem that has to be countered. So all of this needs to be put on the table. We're going to keep having this conversation. The conversation isn't going away. And we are going to continue to talk about it over the course of the next, I hope it's just the next month and a half or so. But I suspect it's going to be longer than that, unless USL gets their kind of grown-up pants on, acts like a grown-up business, instead of rhetorically saying, we're gonna change the game in America. There's all these articles in The Athletic, and Paul McDonough sounds off all the time. Yet, they're not willing to compensate the people who make their league even in a position to do this. They're not willing to properly compensate them. It's a tale as old as time with business owners. But it's not something we have to accept. It's not something I'm going to personally accept. I want USL to be successful. I've invested all this time and energy with very little return financially. This is money out basically for me, this whole thing. Passion project, promoting lower division soccer. But so much of that is about the players. And heaven forbid, that the USL HQ shrunk their profit margins slightly, maybe shared some more revenue with the clubs, which would allow the clubs to properly compensate their workers, their players. There are people in front offices in USL, I'm going to finish on this note, in USL clubs that are making far more than the best players on their team. There are lots of vice presidents in USL HQ making more than all but a handful of players in this league. It's just not acceptable. So this conversation is going to continue. This is the beginning, and I'm sorry if you're uncomfortable with the conversation. You're free to tune me out. It's a free country, but we're going to keep going with this. And I want to thank everybody for their patronage and their support of Beyond the 90.